Welcome to the Braver Angels podcast, a new way of talking politics. I'm your host, Ciaran O'Connor. I am coming to you in the midst of the 2020 election. Over the past few days, we've seen the division and rancor in our country escalate to political violence. 2 protesters were killed. A couple days ago, a Trump supporter was killed. Clearly, the consequences of polarization and political hatred are continuing to swirl in our society. Braver Angels hopes to give Americans a chance to talk about their political differences in a constructive and a healthy way, even when, and perhaps especially when, it feels this divisive and this animated. To that end, we launched the 2020 campaign in July, a campaign to help Americans navigate the election, to help them talk about politics, to help them talk about President Trump, to help them talk about Joe Biden, to help them communicate who they're going to vote for, hopefully with the recognition that regardless of who wins in November, we're still one country and we still do need to work together. In July, we tackled the issue of race. We held debates on police reform, systemic racism, reparations. In September, today is September 1st, we are launching a month called Trump's America. We are conducting a series of programs, debates, forums, conversations, podcasts that we hope will be of particular concern to conservative-leaning Americans. And to that end, on the podcast, I am launching a series of conversations with Braver Angels members who classify themselves as red, who lean conservative, who tend to vote Republican over Democrat, and who tend to support or at least remain sympathetic to President Trump. I am starting today with our first interview in this series with one of my favorite Braver Angels. I'm joined today by Carlos Hernandez. Carlos is a Stanford University educated engineer and problem solver. He is American born, a native San Franciscan, and a Latino. He's been a businessman for 28 years, and he is a proud graduate of Phi Kappa Psi fraternity. Carlos, and I'll let Carlos talk a little bit more about his politics, tends to support President Trump. He also believes deeply in the work of Braver Angels. We're going to have a wide-ranging conversation today. I'm also going to talk a little bit about my own politics. For listeners who don't know, I worked on the Obama campaign in 2012. I worked as a Democratic political consultant for a number of years, and I worked on the losing effort in 2016 to defeat Donald Trump. And I believe deeply in having these conversations. I'm also deeply opposed to President Trump. And I believe that we can have conversations in which we remain honest about our convictions, that we don't try to paper over or cover up differences with niceties and false notions of civility, that we're here to talk about the hard stuff, but we're here to do it in a way that respects the fundamental dignity of one another as human beings and as Americans, in contrast to many of the engagements we're seeing online and offline, which inevitably result in demonization, intended humiliation, and now political violence. Carlos, thank you for coming on this podcast, for being brave, and for being a Braver Angel.
Thank you, gracias, and mahalo.
De nada. So first, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself. Where did you grow up?
If you can see the picture behind me, those are my parents, Rafael and Emilia. I was blessed to be born to them in the city and county of San Francisco. There aren't very many of us who can claim to be not only American, but San Franciscans. That's where I grew up here. I, of course, migrated to Palo Alto to attend Leland Stanford Junior University. Spent 12 years living in the East Coast, i.e. Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then, Long Island, New York. I'm going to get my Long Island accent going on. And returned back home to California in 1991. And I'm also blessed to reside on the island of Kauai in the state of Hawaii.
And so, Carlos, a broad question here. Tell me a little bit about your politics, and particularly, what are some of the experiences you've had that have shaped your worldview, how you think about politics in the United States?
My best metaphor is the following. I am a red angelfish swimming in the fishbowl, and the bowl has blue tinted glass and blue tinted water. That's where I live, in the sea of blue. And here's the irony. I was raised to be a Democrat and converted, defected 4 years ago.
And why did you defect?
Anger was the primary emotional motive. I wanted to get some sense of control back. I was a small business owner. My sibling and I inherited a property from our parents. It was a 62-year-old family-run business. Imagine Hispanics having bought property, as my parents did, in 1955, in the white suburbs of Daly City, just south of San Francisco. Imagine those two Hispanic parents, factory workers. Father didn't go past high school because he served our nation in World War II. Mom didn't go beyond middle school. And they had the American drive, the red term personal agency to buy property and pay it off in 2 years. I found that out after they passed. And then save $15,000 cash to buy an apartment building in a now famous Mission District. And the conversion, the defection from the Blue Party, driven primarily by the politics of the city and county of San Francisco. That's what generated my migration. In fact, I'll use a metaphor. I did climb a wall, and not between our country and Mexico. I climbed out of the blue silo known as San Francisco.
So what I'm hearing in terms of the impetus for your defection is some revulsion toward the blue side, toward potentially what could be called liberal values, at least insofar as how they've been evolving. Obviously, 4 years ago was also the rise of Donald Trump and a transformation, some might say a hostile takeover of the Republican Party. So on the flip side, what is it about Donald Trump and redness, as you might refer to it, that attracted you? Not just being repelled by blues or blue culture or your blue environment, but what attracted you to redness, and particularly the redness of Donald Trump?
Well, first, I'm reminded I'm a braver angel, which means I share an ethos and a culture with you. And I don't mean to cast this widespread dispersion on blues. I will confine my remarks to my experience, to the way blue is practiced in San Francisco. Gosh forbid for me to judge those that live elsewhere that are blue. My experience is grounded in this small area, 7 by 7 square miles, 49 square miles is the kingdom of San Francisco. 825,000 people is the official population. And what attracted me about the redness as portrayed by Donald Trump goes back to my other experience, living on Long Island, where I began to absorb what Frank Sinatra says or sings. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. I'm used to the brashness of New Yorkers. I'll be mindful not to swear on this podcast. But a New Yorker will tell you to your face, go, 3 letters, F yourself. To your face. Whereas in California, it's behind your back. So I was not put off by his personality. Again, if you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. Because in New York, you got to compete for space. To live, to eat, to shop, etc. So I wasn't put off by the personality. In fact, I liked it about him very much. That is what I found attractive about him. When I saw him on television, he was speaking my New York language. If I took you to Long Island, I think you're from certain parts. Yeah, that's how we roll, New Yorkers. I began to absorb that New York mindset, if you will, to compete, to say what's on your mind up front, whether you like it or not. It's your business to deal with it if you don't like it. That's what attracted me to him.
And what about President Trump's agenda?
Ooh, I got to be careful. I don't go down into a rabbit hole here, but I'll open it myself. The specific agenda which attracted me in relation to my experience as a San Francisco-based landlord who's also Hispanic was the issue of immigration. The issue of immigration. My parents, you see behind me, they didn't know the word rule of law. It wasn't in their language. But law and order was. Right from wrong was. And being Catholic, it was emphasized. Imagine me being 10 years old, in front of the principal, Dr. Camoyen, Samuel was his first name, Thomas Edison Grammar School in the Mission District of San Francisco. I don't know what I did to deserve to be there, but I was. And my parents were flanking me. And my mom picked up a ruler that was on his desk, gold-plated, substantially sized ruler. And she asked him, "What do you do with this?" I'm not sure if he laughed or cringed. He said, "It's how I issue discipline." And my mom said to him, and she was sitting to my side, "Do not call us for permission to use this on Carlos. You have it up front." I sat there as a terrified 10-year-old to respect authority. Respect authority. Hence the immigration issue.
So I'm hearing an appreciation for Donald Trump's willingness to be brash, to be direct, even if it means being vulgar, and for his commitment to an immigration reform that places a heavy emphasis on the rule of law. When you think about President Trump and you think beyond the qualities that draw you to him and mean that you're going to vote for him in November, what reservations do you have? Is there anything that makes you think twice?
I would be a fool to say no. Because if I said yes or no, your podcasters would be laughing and maybe even hitting pause and not want to finish the rest of this interview. So here's my imagery for the audience. A stool, a tripod, the most stable structure on earth, a tripod. One tripod stands for principles, one tripod stands for policies, and one leg of the tripod stands for personalities. He draws a lot of attention regarding his personality. I am not a qualified mental health professional to judge his DSM code. Not for me to say. Not for me to say. And for those who do want to judge him, go right ahead. And because I'm a Catholic, Christian, I'll refer you to the gospel of Jesus, where a crowd of Jewish leaders were about to stone a woman accused of adultery. And the great prophet Jesus said to the crowd, among you who has not sinned, throw the first stone. So for you podcast listeners, without sin, go ahead, throw the first stone.
How do you feel about the assertion offered by many liberals, and one with which I'm highly sympathetic, that at his core, Donald Trump is not a uniter, that he is a divider, that he cares less about representing and uniting all Americans and more about winning, about promoting his own interests and fighting for the folks that I think he calls my people, a qualification that does not extend to liberals. How do you feel about that troublesome, liberals might say, core quality in the president?
I'm drawn to two people and their observations. One is Condoleezza Rice from my school. She now, I believe, is at the Hoover Tower. And in her book called Democracy, one of the easiest things that she wrote was, democracy is messy. The other is a CNN panelist, at least he was, David Gergen, who served in 2 administrations. He spoke as a guest at the Commonwealth Club in San Francisco, bipartisan, by the way. And he was asked that same question just after the election. And I'm not going to try to pronounce the Latin, the e pluribus, etc. And he mentioned the following. In our current state of the United States, where our melting pot is so diverse, there isn't a majority anymore. It's going to be messy. Going to be messy. I challenge anybody in the audience, is your marriage not messy? Is your family that united? Really? If you can't unite your own little family over issues of alcoholism, unemployment, etc., then who's going to be that big to unite the whole country? I don't think so. Heck, George Washington, in his second administration, my data is from the History Channel. If they're biased, oh my God, I'll be sad to hear. During his second administration, folks were really upset at him for imposing taxes. And a group of Americans in Pennsylvania wanted to break away and fight. During the second administration, we were that young. It was messy even then. So we are a nation of messes, sometimes more manageable than others, depending who's in charge. Not unique to us, not unique to mankind. So what we're going through now might be exceptional to the amount of unfortunate deaths, but I don't think we've ever been perfect. Under whose administration were we ever perfect? I can't think of one.
And so what draws you to the work of Braver Angels, and how do you reconcile that with your support for Trump? The reason I ask is because, to my mind, when I see President Trump, in some ways he represents the opposite of the values that we stress at Braver Angels. Empathy, respect, honesty, and compassion. What I see in President Trump often, in my experience, is not honesty. It's a willingness to completely lie. I don't see empathy. I see cruelty. I see transparent efforts to demean and humiliate those he perceives as enemies, a word that he himself has often used to describe his political opponents. I see a casual inclination to try to demonize, to disparage, and in his mind, to dominate. I don't know if that impression squares with yours. I imagine it doesn't. How do you think about those qualities that I would argue President Trump embodies? And then how do you think about that aligns with the values of Braver Angels and the work that we try to do, which places such a big emphasis on empathy, honesty, and understanding?
I'm going to first address the various questions and my attempt to unpack them by something I learned and read. I believe it was the departed Supreme Court Justice Scalia, or one of his colleagues was known to say, when people were arguing before the bench, I'm not tracking your question. So I'm going to try to track your various questions and unpack them thoughtfully. And I'm going to practice a Braver Angel principle. My reply has to be from my personal experience. Why and how I am where I am now is simple enough. After I made the decision to vote for who I voted for, which is my business, no one else's, in the glow of the inauguration day, I walked down the street of my neighborhood, zip code 94131, and I came across a storefront, a pet shop. Oops, I just outed the guy. And I have a photo on my phone, but I'm not going to fumble with it now. And it had a dozen Trump dolls hung in effigy. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. In public, storefront, San Francisco, a bastion of blue, a bastion of compassion. Really? And then I walked by, my stomach was upset. And I had the guts to walk back in, gracefully ask the storekeeper, what is that? And his reply was, oh, it's just a store display. To which I said, oh, would you have hung African-American dolls like that? Would you have hung a doll of a Jewish rabbi like that? What does this have to do with Braver Angels? It's safe to come out of the closet in Braver Angels. When I heard of this organization and the safety they offered, and I attended my first workshop in Alameda, the Red Blue workshop, I drank the Kool-Aid. And I really drank the Kool-Aid even more when a blue across the table from me, a female, which I made anonymous for now, discussed what it was like to be a blue on Facebook and being assailed by fellow blues because she wasn't blue enough in the Berkeley style. Holy cow, we now have common ground. We're both being assailed for our values and convictions. Hence, we're both in Braver Angels. Hence, we're both co-chairs. Because this is a church of safety, grounded by its ethos, its culture, and our fellow angels to the most part. I'm not saying we're all perfect. That's how I resolve the conflict. I can be me in this room, on this call with you. I'm retired now. But I have fellow angels that you might even know would not do this. Why? Because their employers would fire them. Yes, dismiss them from their jobs. We had a Braver Angel on a Silicon Valley Zoom call months ago. He was so afraid of his email being released. Why? Because a colleague in Silicon Valley got fired by the blue CEO because he was a red. Talk about being assailed. Oh, let's talk. That's how I resolve the conflict. This church is safe to be and express who I am without being the other word with how many characters? 7. Starts with an A, ends with an E.
I think that's a powerful expression of exactly what we seek to do at Braver Angels, which is to provide a safe space.
Amen.
For people to be themselves and for people to develop relationships and find common values, even when they have sharply divergent political beliefs, even when the politicians that they support might draw utter anger or utter contempt. So I appreciate you sharing that, and I hope it's empowering for our listeners to hear, blue and red.
And I'm not done yet. I'm not done yet, Ciaran. I'll cut you off right here because I met you in that context last year in St. Louis. And it was the opening night at Washington University. And there we were, 250 of us, balanced, by the way, because you guys scripted it that way, which was cool for me. And we sang American theme songs. OMG, God bless America. We were there as Americans. How wonderful, how sweet it was to taste liberty that way. I knew right then and there as a Catholic, because we love music. We love big services. I'm in the right place. I am in the right church. OMG.
So I want to return just to my last question, the second half of it, because I think that my question ended up being a bit of a run-on and a bit convoluted. How do you think about what some might see as the dissonance between the values of Braver Angels, openness, honesty, vulnerability, empathy, and the values of Donald Trump?
I will answer that by citing another value of Braver Angels. You don't have to pretend. You can say what's on your mind. Of course, it helps if you don't swear, etc., etc. That's how it's resolved. We don't have to like them. You don't have to like them. But there's a seat in the pew where he can feel safe and no one's going to put a gun to his head or a knife to his back. And conversely, if Mr. Biden wins or Ms. Harris shows up or Mrs. Pelosi, she can sit there and not afraid, hopefully, of a gun-toting red, legally licensed to carry, not shooting her in the back of the head.
I completely agree. And I think that ultimately, in some ways, there's a fork between conversation and violence. One of the reasons that I'm so deeply opposed to President Trump and why I feel that he presents a threat to our mission is that he does not condemn violence. He does not say that he wants everyone to have a safe environment in which no one puts a gun to their head, as you said. To my mind, he flirts with violence. He winks at violence. He offers cover to those who might perpetrate violence against those he calls enemies. Because what do you do against enemies?
I'm going to unpack that thought again with another personal experience. The media. I was interviewed by a New York Times reporter who we gave permission to at a Braver Angels Alliance authorized workshop, Red Blue. And she found me fascinating. Oh my God, you're brown and a red? Really, Carlos? In San Francisco? What is your gig? And I told her, because she was composing an article. She called me 3 days before it was published with a sort of apology. Her editor told her to change it. Sorry, Carlos. All I want to know is your official age. If you go back and find that article, and you read what she wrote at her editor's direction, and you interview faithfully the dozen of us brave Angels around the table, it was spun. So I don't bite on what I see in the media about what Don says, what Donald doesn't say, because it might not be in context. Like my interview was not in context at an authorized Braver Angels event. So until I meet the man myself, spend time with him, in the end, his judge is his creator. His second judge is his spouse. His third judge is his kids. And his fourth judge is his therapist if he has one, or his confessor. Not for me to judge. Not for me to judge. Because I dare say, a lot of our presidents have closets too.
I certainly won't dispute that point. Well, you mentioned Braver Angels' efforts to remain open to conservatives and to reach out to conservatives and to Trump supporters in particular, because I will acknowledge that among many of our Reds, never Trumpers, quote unquote, may be disproportionately represented. I guess I would ask, how do you think we're doing when it comes to pursuing our mission on the Red side, and how can we do a better job?
Well, again, from my own experience, I find the Church of Braver Angels, and I say it with affection, to be open and attractive. I get to do what I do. I've not been told once to change my mind. Now, mindful, I better be a nice person with speaking with you and the others, so my message isn't discounted because the messenger's being, a butthead. This question comes up a lot with us Reds. I think they're like me, in the closet. Especially Black conservatives, especially Hispanic conservatives. Are they out there? I suspect so. And they get to exercise the American privilege of privacy. No one will never know what box they checked when they go to the mailbox, or what lever they pushed in the old-fashioned booth, or whatever digital tool they use to vote. I believe we are out there, not safe to come out. They're exercising their right to privacy. That was me. Heck, I got nervous when you called to ask me to do this. Really? I wanted to say no. I wanted to chicken out. I said to self, I'm 63 years old. I'm not 38 anymore, worried about my next paycheck. If I don't say it now, when will I? So thank you for the leadership you guys have to even do something like this. Here's a New York word for you, that takes chutzpah. To plan, to plan an event in September dedicated to Trump, I can imagine the Blues are howling. But as a former New Yorker, Long Islander, chutzpah, yeah.
Yeah. And for all I will say about Trump, I think the man does have some chutzpah. Even if I believe that it's directed toward very destructive ends.
Here's my hope.
Carlos,
go ahead. Here's a big stake to what we're about. Berkeley, California, the bastion of blueness. They're now an alliance. I'll name the current leadership, Maxime Shogren. I hope I didn't mispronounce his name. I call him Rabbi out of affection. He admits he's bluer than blue. Linda Spencer, I believe, is a paid member of Braver Angels, and Joel Schaefer. They're now one of us because they got Reds on the team in Berkeley. Holy cow. Why did they become one of us? They could have done something else because they want to have a legitimate conversation with the opposite side. They got tired of their own echo chamber. They got tired of arguing with themselves. And if it wasn't for COVID, I'd be going over there right now in my red shirt, my Stanford red shirt, with his Berkeley Cal Blue shirt, having a knish, having a real bagel, having a cup of coffee. And in the Jewish culture, you talk, you get animated, but you still talk and listen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what we're about. And that's why I'm glad you came on the podcast and you agreed to be my guinea pig. I guess before we go, I would turn it over to you. And I wonder, do you have any questions for me?
I do. I have questions for you. And then I have a couple things that have caught my attention over some books that I've read. And I'm going to ask you this in Braver Angel style. Which aspects of blue and red, notice I said and, not or, attract you?
Well, I'll start with red. And I will ascribe to the red side conservative values as I see them, the conservative values that I find valuable, honorable, and those for which we should strive. Honesty, decency, integrity, virtue, rectitude. And I'm not saying that these are not liberal values, because I think quote unquote liberal values and quote unquote conservative values get caricatured and polarized like everything else. But I do think in the conservative tradition, there has been a strong emphasis on those values. And that's one reason why I am so opposed to President Trump. I do not think he represents those conservative values. On the other side, when it comes to values that I saw in Barack Obama, for example, who's the reason that I got into politics in the first place, I think that Obama is ultimately someone who believes in American ideals and the pursuit of a more perfect union. If you look at a lot of Barack Obama's rhetoric, it could be taken from the Braver Angels website. Now, I know a lot of people think he was slick and smooth, and deep down, he hates conservatives. I thought that, interestingly enough, Barack Obama actually exemplified a lot of those values that often get associated with conservatives. Family, decency, even-handedness, and a recognition that we need to pursue fairness and equality and justice if we are to fulfill those founding values. And I think there is a way to reconcile. In some ways, the two notions complete one another. And I worry now that in the polarized environment and the rhetoric you hear coming from people on the extremes, there's an expression that there is no way to reconcile this, that we are two countries. And I wonder where things go. I wonder, to be facetious, what happens if on election night, President Trump claims to have eked out a narrow victory in the Electoral College, despite losing the popular vote by President Trump. A week later, after all the mail-in ballots are counted, the Democrats say that they've won the Electoral College. Then the Supreme Court decides in a 5-4 partisan decision that President Trump will remain the president. You know what I think Gavin Newsom will say? Not in California. He's not the president. And then where do we go? So I think it's important to articulate, advocate, defend, and pursue your values. And I know I'm going to do what I can between now and November to help Joe Biden win the presidency, to help the Democrats take the Senate. But I'm also going to keep doing and redoubling my efforts to do what we're doing it with Braver Angels, because in some ways, that's the more fundamental project. And that's why I supported Barack Obama, because I really felt like in many ways he was trying to unite America. I did not think that he was full of shit. I think he might have gotten a little lost in the sauce, as they said. But I believe in what we're doing, and I'm grateful to people like you, because I think it takes bravery on both sides, but it really does take a lot of bravery to be a Trump-supporting red in San Francisco and to be willing to come on this podcast and to share what you did today. So I'm really grateful and honored that you would do that.
And I'm grateful to you for what you have done and are doing for our country. And by the way, before I defected, I worked on the Obama campaign too. Voted for him twice. And again, I want to bring my audience back to my experience. It's one thing to admire Obama, his policies, the way he spoke, etc. It's a different story to the way that it was practiced in San Francisco. And that's what I was afraid of, or am afraid of, if the rest of the country becomes like us. And I got 3 metrics, and they're not mine. The first is from a book called Soul of America by John Meacham. And he quotes Teddy Roosevelt, who listed 3 duties for Americans. I'll only quote the last one. We need to do what we need to do in accordance with the highest principles of honor and justice. No mention of color there. Values, honor, and justice. The second is from a quote from the book 41, A Portrait of My Father by George W. Bush, writing about his dad. His dad wrote, "If there is to be a period of darkness, so be it. We're in one now. But let us try to bring some candles." So whoever wins on whatever day, and as a Catholic, we're into candles. Bring candles. Light them up. And then the last quote is from the book 3 Days in January by Fox News anchor Britt Baer, who wrote about Ike. I got a tough job before JFK took charge. I love his question. Is it good for America? So if we can do what we need to do as a country, between those 3 signposts, we're going to be okay. If we manage to mess it up, it'll be for future anthropologists, sociologists, psychologists, historians to write about us on how we messed it up. I'll be gone by then, likely. You won't. So I'll be looking down from Braver Angel Heaven, cheering for you, cheering for John Wood and the others. Doherty. All right, guys, get to work. It's not done yet. It's not done yet.
Yes. There's a lot of work that remains to be done. And I think that's a good note on which to end. So I would thank you again, Carlos. I would say to our listeners, let me and Carlos know what you thought about this podcast. We want to hear from you. Email us your responses at media@braverangels.org. We take compliments, we take complaints, we take it all. And please, if you like this podcast, subscribe, rate, share. And if you're not a member of Braver Angels, please consider joining. It's only $1 a month. Peace.
And join an alliance.
Join an alliance.
Join an alliance.
That's right.
Yeah.
Join an alliance in your community and come to some of our online debates. We are having a national debate September 3rd. The topic is Trump and Black America. We will have over 1,000 liberals and conservatives from across all 50 states gathering to attend a debate in which participants will be arguing in the Braver Angels way whether they believe President Trump's policies have been good or bad for Black America. We will have a full roster of programming this month, much of which will be dedicated to exploring, engaging, and recruiting Trump supporters. On September 17th, we'll be hosting our second big Coliseum debate. The topic, cancel culture. We'll look to see you there. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.